probably never leave me. And it was not necessarily in my treatment, but in the treatment of somebody else that I observed. This is this person who's unable to speak. And she's, having that treatment. They have lasers, they have music going. And I think the whole office came in and started singing this song together to encourage her to be able to speak. And you just don't find that everywhere. That compassion for someone, and that the uniqueness to come and want to be a part of it and sing with joy and love, like that will probably never leave my mind. Like I honestly, I got goosebumps when I was watching it, and I thought, oh, God is most definitely present here.
So as a caregiver, you hold so much of their trauma in yourself. For me personally, I was trying to take his trauma, trying to take his pain, trying to take all of that into my own body so that he didn't have to feel that. And I thought that I had let it go, but until I sat with Dr. Jerry, I had not let go of it, obviously, because I still felt that tension in my body. But as soon as she did that to me, it was like a full release of just everything. And I let out a huge breath, and Jaden let out a huge breath at the exact same time that I did. We're so connected that if I let my trauma go from this situation, he'll feel that trauma leave his body too. And then he can feel the peace, then I think he has the opportunity to heal.
Thank you everybody for coming in. I'm happy to see all of you. My name is Mary. I am a licensed professional counselor, a certified integrative mental health provider, a certified neurofeedback provider, and I'm certified in autism, anxiety, ADHD, sleep, nutrition, and a whole bunch of other things that go in conjunction with mental health. I own a practice called Infinite Potential Counseling. We have 2 physical locations. One is in Round Rock, the other is in Dripping Springs. I do genetics behind mental health. I work on the gut-brain axis. We work on toxicities, sensitivities, and deficiencies. I am extremely passionate about neurofeedback, so I'm going to do my best to keep this under the hour. This is typically an 8-hour training just to get basic information about neurofeedback. So I've pulled what I think is the most important information to share for right now. If you guys have more questions, please come and talk to me at my table. I'm more than happy to talk to you. Okay. A little background about me, and I'm going to be very brief with it because if I tell the whole story, I'm going to be bawling and there's going to be mascara everywhere. I am the mom of a child who suffered 2 brain injuries. The first one he suffered at 18 months. We walked into his 18-month checkup and he was happy and healthy and developing normally. He received the DTaP vaccine and did not walk out of his appointment. We left having seizures. He lost the ability to walk, the ability to talk. We went completely backwards. I was able to do a lot of work with him. We got him mostly healed, and at the age of 3, he was shook by a daycare provider, and I was greeted by police officers and an ambulance when I arrived at the daycare center. There were 6 witnesses to how violently she had shook him, and they transported us immediately to the hospital. Sorry. We did a lot of work with my son. My original degrees were actually in hotel restaurant management, travel and tourism, and culinary arts. I'm a trained French chef, and I did wedding and event planning for years before my son was injured. But working with the typical medical paradigm, I was not happy with the answers that I was getting. And the doctors were more concerned with their egos than they were with my child. There came a point in time where I just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm going back to school. I'm fixing my kid on my own because none of you are helping me. At the time I lived in Connecticut, I could drive to Boston Children's, I could go to Yale, I could go to Cambridge. I had all of the best doctors at my disposal, but not one of them would talk to each other, which was really, really frustrating as a mom, and I was really angry. So I did go back to school so that I could figure out how to do this on my own. And neurofeedback was one of the primary ways that I was able to heal my son. While I was going to college, I got trained at the Yale Child Study Center, where they introduced me to neurofeedback training, and we were using it on children with autism spectrum disorders. So when I left, I went into a locked ward facility in Connecticut, because after you graduate college as a counselor, you have to do 6,000 hours under someone else before you're allowed to work on your own. In Connecticut, that's always in a state facility, where I was assaulted by a client who fractured my skull. I was having 100 seizures a day, and because it was a workman's comp issue, I was stuck inside of the workman's comp medical paradigm. My husband and I got tired of that, and I went back to neurofeedback for myself. I did neurofeedback with CBD and bariatric oxygen chamber. They had written me out as completely disabled. They said I was never going to work again. And I'm now running a practice with multiple locations, and I'm coaching across the country. So for me and my son, we were very lucky. We were able to heal our brain injuries. It took a lot of work and a lot of time. I will not promise that anybody else is going to have the same results that we did, but I will tell you that if you are, working with a provider, especially a provider who's been through this, we hear you and we see you, and I understand everything that you're going through. Okay. So I've been fascinated with the brain since my son was injured. The brain and the body are such an amazing machine. And when they're working correctly, everything is wonderful. It's great. But when it's not, as you all know, life is much more difficult. It can be quite a struggle every single day. During the time of my head injury, I have periods of time I don't remember. And I lost time with my children because they remember things that I don't. So neurofeedback. It is a non-invasive form of therapy. It aims to regulate brain activity and improve mental health by providing real-time feedback. And I actually have a video on here. I'm going to show you what we see on the screen while we're doing a session, as well as what you or your child see on the screen while we're doing a session, okay? So during an appointment, we're monitoring brainwave activity, and we are providing visual and auditory feedback through the entire appointment to trigger brain growth and to get brain waves to correct themselves. So how effective is it? This is one of my favorite quotes by Frank Duffy. He said that literature suggests that neurofeedback should play a major role in many areas. If any medication had demonstrated such a wide spectrum of efficacy, it would be universally accepted and widely used. It's a field to be taken seriously by all. Now, people always tell me they've never heard about neurofeedback. And the people who have heard about it don't know how old it actually is. Neurofeedback has been around since 1924. So why do we use it? All of this is true. I get people who come to our practice that are looking to get off of medication, who never want to be on medication, who've had head injuries, whether it's a car accident, a sports injury. I've worked with soldiers, and one of the case studies that I have is a car accident. Another one is a soldier with PTSD who also has head injuries from 4 explosions in the Middle East. So we see families for a lot of different reasons, and what they're seeking is they want to get back to homeostasis. So this is the first neurofeedback machine that was used by Hans Berger, and he actually started research in 1924. he was doing it on his son. He would have his son do different tasks, whether it was reading or drawing or thinking of things, the Lord's Prayer or something like that, and then he would monitor his brainwave activity and see what was going on. This machine is massive. Most of us doctors cannot put this in our offices. The technology has come very, very far since this. It was initially used mostly for epilepsy and seizures. A lot of the original research is around seizures, and the first actual QEEG was done during a brain surgery on somebody with seizures. It was a fascinating study. That he was in Germany at the time, and Germany and Europe were doing most of the research at the beginning. Neurofeedback didn't really hit the United States until the 1950s. Drs. Joe Kamaya and Dr. Barry Sturman are continued are basically two of the people who brought neurofeedback to the United States. Dr. Kamaya was studying consciousness, and he found that if you provide a simple reward system, you could correct brainwave activity. He did the first alpha theta neurofeedback, which is what we use for most seizure disorders. I work with seizures on a regular basis. We have a 5-year-old in our office right now. We have taken her from having seizures every day to having seizures every 16 days. And her seizures before were basically grand mal seizures. Her entire body would convulse and she would scream throughout the entire thing. Right now, her seizures are very mild. There's no body convulsing, and she just has a minor cough while she's going through the seizures. So for her family, this has been a major change in their life and her quality of life, because when she would be on one of the days when she's gonna have her seizures, her behavior was extremely aggressive and she was crying and she was very moody. They're not experiencing that anymore. So around the same time, Dr. Sturman was running experiments to see if cats could increase their sensory motor rhythm. His study involved this machine that we see right here, and he would give them a food pellet every time they got their brainwave patterns correctly. And they quickly learned to control their brainwaves to get the treat. What was interesting is he was asked by NASA to come in and do a study on astronauts. And what they were dealing with was the rocket fuel fumes were causing hallucinations, headaches, seizures, and death. So he brought in the cats and started doing studies on how cats responded to the same rocket fuel. And they were seeing the same thing in the cats, except for the cats that had done SMR training. They appeared to be almost immune to the rocket fuel. So they started doing experiments with the astronauts and discovered that the astronauts that went through SMR training also were not having the effects of rocket fuel. This training is used now on every single astronaut. They cannot go into space without receiving SMR training. So all these years later, like I said, they're still using it. And Sturman continued his research, and he began using SMR training for epilepsy. In his study, 60% of subjects reduced their seizures from 20 to 100%, and the results appeared to be permanent. So we've come a long way since 1960 with all of his research. Today, we have a much better understanding of neuroplasticity. They used to tell us that kids' brains could change themselves, adult brains couldn't. We know now that that's not true. A child brain is able to change faster, but we can do neurofeedback all the way through the age of 103. I've had people in my office with Parkinson's and dementia, and we have been able to help get back quality of life so that they can take care of themselves, toilet themselves, things like that. We also have a much better understanding of brain function. And neurofeedback has thousands upon thousands of articles that are available on different things. Insurance does not cover neurofeedback. They used to. 8 years ago, while we were practicing, we received a letter from all of the insurance companies in the same week, citing the same 6 studies saying neurofeedback doesn't work on anything. So now they don't pay for it, which is unfortunate because I have seen so many positive changes in people's lives through neurofeedback.
None of the good stuff is paid for anyways.
No. So when we're doing neurofeedback, I have to understand brain function and anatomy. I have to understand the brainwave patterns that we're dealing with. This is one of my favorite quotes because when I am working with a family that has PTSD and I'm doing a map, I can see the trauma in their brain. But if we bring up one of the memories, we see the brain fired just a little bit differently. The trauma is still there, but the pain that they feel is in a different part of the brain than if you get cut. You experience pain someplace else inside of the brain. So the way that the brain wires our experiences is so cool to look at on the screen. So the brain has 2 hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. They both have different jobs. The left hemisphere is really about controlling the right side of the body. It has to do with math, science, numbers, charts, graphs, and logic. Well, the right brain has to do with controlling the left-hand side of your body. And we really bring this is art, creativity, and emotion in the right hemisphere. What's interesting is when we are looking at a left-handed person's brain, it's reversed. So whenever I'm working with a left-handed client, I have to reverse the protocols that I'm writing because brain function is different. I actually had a client with dyslexia that I didn't realize she was left-handed. I hadn't seen her do any handwriting. We started the dyslexia protocol. She got no benefits after their first 2 appointments, which is extremely rare. So I walked in, noticed she was writing, and I was like, "You're left-handed? Oh my goodness." We changed the protocol, and she had benefits after the very first appointment. Okay, so different parts of the brain have different jobs. The frontal cortex is the very front of the brain. These are all of the things that it's responsible for, with executive functioning being one of the primary jobs. We used to say that this was fully formed between 20 and 25, but current research is saying it's 30 to 35. There's a lot of theories behind why. I know when I was growing up, I had to memorize things. Nobody's phone number was saved in my cell phone, and I had to read a map. We do think that the way that we are relying on electronics more and more is impacting brain growth and development. Because if I sit down with a child who lives in a tribe and map them at the age of 7, their frontal cortex is developed because they're living in a different part of the world and they have different experiences. Most of what happens in the prefrontal cortex is life experience. We can help this area in a lot of people, but I can't make people be 35. I have parents that come into my office all the time complaining about executive functioning, and we'll work on the executive functioning, but I can't give life experience. All right, the sensory motor cortex, this is the parietal lobe. It's on both sides of the head here. This is where we experience all of our sensory. I have seen some really interesting things with people that have damage to their parietal lobes. I've had a kid who came into my office that experienced no pain at all, had cut their head open, blood pouring down their face, and had no idea where the blood was coming from. They just don't sense it. Same kid, however, got a paper cut, and it was the end of the world, just because the body was picking up pain in different ways for this kiddo. I've also had kids that have come into my office, and they can hear the garbage truck, down the road 3 miles, and they know that it's coming. Or we have to put on earmuffs because they can hear the refrigerator running 2 doors over with all of the doors closed in between us. So this is really about how the sensory system is working and whether or not they're over-processing senses or under-processing senses. I have had some really intriguing cases of people who can see and hear like color and sound, and this region of the brain is overstimulated for them. So the occipital lobe falls on the very back of the head, and this is how our eyes are communicating with our brain. So a lot of the time I will get parents that come in and they tell me, I can send my kid to his bedroom to look for his sneakers, and he can't come back with his sneakers. I go into his bedroom and his sneakers are next to his feet. But he says, I don't know where they are. This is because when this child walks into their bedroom, their eyes are picking up everything except the thing they're looking for. So when we're working on the visual fields with these kids, we may actually have them doing like Where's Waldo during their neurofeedback appointments, so that we're challenging the visual cortex to find the things that we're looking for. And then our temporal lobes, these fall right over our ears. This is all of our hearing. This is how we process everything that has to do with sound. Kiddos that have damage to this region of the brain, even if it's with anxiety or ADHD, they'll report while they're sitting in a classroom, they basically just hear wah, 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 wah from the teacher, because what they're hearing is the kid 2 seats next to them who's going like this through the entire class. That's the only sound their ears are picking up. They struggle in restaurants because there's too much auditory stimulation for them. And they can't focus on the speech that they're supposed to be focusing on. You can literally be looking at them, talking directly to them, and they hear nothing because they hear everything else. Okay. And then the cingulate gyrus, this is a very, not that any part of the brain is not important, this is a particularly important part of the brain. This part of the brain has biological implications because it is the part of the brain that's responsible for all of our endocrine function as well as hormone function. Whenever we have damage in this region of the brain, we can be looking at things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, all of these things that you don't think have anything at all to do with brain function actually start here. And this is also the part of the brain that's responsible for bonding. So mothers that have damage to this region of the brain struggle to bond with their infants. But other people that have issues with this region of the brain struggle to bond in general with people. And then the brainstem. So this is very often damaged when there's a brain injury. And the reason that this is so vital for us is because this is our relay system for our entire body. This part of the brain sends messages from our brain to the rest of the body and from the rest of our body to our brain to be interpreted. So when this is not functioning correctly, we have issues with balance, blood pressure. We may struggle with breathing. A lot of stroke victims find that breathing is more difficult. They don't feel their face, or they may have a side of their face where there's no muscle movement. Heart rhythms can actually be affected by this region of the brain, and swallowing can be more difficult. This part of the brain contains our cranial nerves, and it controls all of our facial movements, sensations, and taste. This part of the brain is also the part of the brain that tends to be attacked by things. It's in the limbic system falls here. It tends to be attacked by things like PANS or PANDAS, Lyme disease, and long COVID. All of our research right now is showing that COVID is attacking this region of the brain. So when we work with a client that has damage to this region of the brain because of COVID, we're doing low frequency training that's hitting specifically the brainstem. Okay, so our brain is really cool in the fact that it has different brainwave frequencies and they all have a different job. It's kind of like a computer. It has different power needs based on the job it's doing in the moment. Our first brainwave pattern is our delta wave, and this is our sleep wave. It runs from 1 to 4 hertz, and you can see they all have a different wave pattern. Our theta wave runs from 4 to 8 hertz, and this is the wave, they have only that it deals with sleep, but this wave has 3 jobs. 1 is helping you to fall asleep. 2 is memory and recall. So anybody that struggles with memory, there's a theta wave issue going on. But it's also a healing brainwave. So if we don't have a strong Our alpha wave is our relaxed and happy wave. This is the brain wave that allows us to calm down, to go and just enjoy life. Beta waves run from 13 to 30 hertz. And inside of this brainwave pattern, we have a lot of different jobs that beta does. The earlier parts of beta wave has to do with just basic life activities. As you start going up in the brain waves, this is recalling things like the Lord's Prayer or the Pledge of Allegiance. You've said it over and over again. You don't really have to think about it. It barely activates the beta waves. When we're getting up into the high beta waves, like at the 30 waves, this is the brain's gas pedal is all the way to the floor. This is racing thoughts, anxiety, inability to focus. Okay? And then our gamma waves are waves that are over 30. This is when we're concentrating or hyper-focusing or we're learning something difficult. So I'm really good at everything that I do, but if you put calculus in front of me, I don't have any idea what's going on. My whole brain lights up with gamma waves if calculus is in front of me, because I just don't get it. And when we're looking at a brain injury, not only are we looking at the regions of the brain that are affected, but the brain waves that are affected. Because every brain injury is different. There is not one protocol that we use for everybody that has a head injury. I start with everybody doing a brain map. I need to see what region of the brain is being affected for you, and then what brain waves in those regions are causing the difficulty. Okay, so what does a session look like? So a brain map, like I said, is the first step of the process. There is sound to this, but it's not actually anything important. So when you come in for a brain map, we use what's essentially a tape measure to see what size cap I need for your head. And the caps look like this, but they come in different colors. Depending on the size of the head, we have infant ones that are super duper tiny. And then we have, larger ones for people who have bigger heads. So we measure everyone. The most typical sizes that we use are the red cap and the blue cap. Most adults are a blue cap, whereas most children are a red cap. Anyone under 3 tends to be yellow. We have to make sure that the cap fits tightly on the head so that we're getting the sensors that are in the cap in the right locations. After we get the cap on the head, you're going to see he pulls out what looks like a needle. It is a blunt needle that is going to put ultrasound gel into the cup of each of these sensors so that we can read what's going on inside of the brain. When he's done setting him up in this chair, he's going to move over to the recliner. And when we do either a brain map or a neurofeedback session, you're actually sitting in the recliner with the lights off. Okay. All right, so for a neurofeedback appointment, after we have determined what the locations are, we can do whole brain training where we're using the cap, but the caps are expensive. They're about $600 a piece. So we don't tend to do that. And you also cannot write protocols going after specific brainwave patterns. So like the client that I'm working with seizures, her brainwaves inside of beta are way up over 30. And I have to get her brainwave patterns down between 12 and 17. If I'm using the whole cap, I can't do that. It is going for every single location inside of the brain, and her seizures are coming from 2 locations. So we can do as few as 1 location on the brain. C4 SMR training is the training that they used on all of those cats. And it's the most typical seizure protocol that we use. We only need that 1 location, but we have to have the brainwave patterns very, very specific for that person. This kiddos are in 2 locations. It's C4 and P4 for her. So I had to write the protocols going after her 2 locations and then going after her specific patterns to slow down her seizures. Most people have protocols that include 4 leads that go on the head. Our leads are only reading. We are not sending any information in with the leads that are on the scalp. Okay? All right, so remember that very first machine in 1924? This is the current machine. It's about this size. And machines have come down quite significantly in price over the last 20 years. The first system that I purchased was over $40,000. The last system that I purchased was only $15,000. It's the same exact system, but they've just come so much farther with the technology, and we have more access to the systems. All right, so this is what our technicians are watching when a brain is going through neurofeedback. So you'll see on the screen here that all of these are moving. We're watching the brain actually change in real time, okay? There are tabs along the bottom of the screen, and we can watch the brainwave patterns themselves and see what brainwave patterns we're seeing on the screen, but this gives us the most information. We actually want the entire brain to be white. Where it is yellow, orange, and red, it is moving much faster than it is supposed to, with red being the fastest. It's 3 standard deviations outside of the norm, and the green and blue is moving slower than it's supposed to. On these down here, the lines that are going in between the locations, these are the locations that we have leads on, and we're watching how fast the communication is between those actual locations. And then this is what the trainee sees. You're not going to be able to hear the sound very well. While you're doing a neurofeedback session and we're monitoring the brainwave activity, the computer is giving you feedback by shutting off the screen or dimming it if your brain's not working the way that we're asking it to. And there's also a sound that starts in the background. And the sound is quite annoying, being a technician who's had to sit in the room through all of the beeps. But what it does is it triggers the brain to go, wait a minute, what was I doing that kept the screen on so I can see the show? And how do I get this stupid noise to go away? Now, I had somebody ask if it's possible to do this if somebody doesn't have a good visual field. And yes, we can actually do neurofeedback with eyes closed. We would use music instead of having you watch the screen. And what happens with music is it stops the music so that your brain corrects the brainwave patterns, and it actually helps the brain to regrow dendrites that were improperly pruned. Everyone that we are working with neurofeedback is put on a high-fat diet. If we're working with someone that has Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, I put them completely on carnivore, because the brain is a fat-heavy organ, and it wants all of the fat that you can give it. If we want it to heal, we need to overload it with fat. So while we're doing neurofeedback, we're doing, a mostly meat diet. We're talking about steak, fish, and we put everybody on fish oil that has DHA and EPA, because we need to myelinate the entire brain and make sure that communication is happening. Okay, so I brought in 2 case studies that have to do with head injuries. This first one was a gentleman who owns 7 businesses. He was in a car accident, and he came into our office because he had lost his ability to be organized. He was not on top of his businesses. Things were going pretty bad. His wife reported that he had no affect. There was no emotion coming from him at all that he could express, though she saw that he was upset all the time and he was sad all the time. You'll see in our reading right here, ABI, ABI, ABI. That's acquired brain injury. So our map is able to show us exactly what is going on inside of the brain for the individual. He had a lot of insomnia, which you'll also see on each one of those. He was not sleeping at all. And she said, even though he didn't express anger, she could see that he was angry. And he had lost his laugh. He had a very infectious laugh. And we got the joy of being able to hear it as he was going through the process of neuro with healing. Because when his brain started to communicate the way that it was supposed to, and he was watching a funny TV show, his laugh echoed through our entire building. It was really, really awesome to hear. They have 2 small kids, and his kids were also saying that he wasn't spending much time with them. It was more like he was just there. He was a lump on the couch, okay? We've had the pleasure of working with him. He is currently going through brain training just for peak performance, but this was his entire brain map. Now, this chart down here on the bottom, we want the entire head to be white, okay? As you go from yellow to orange to red, it's moving too fast. As you go from light blue to dark blue, it's moving too slow. I reran this map 3 times because I have never seen a brain so underpowered in my entire career. I actually also called my mentor. Even though I've been doing this for 12 years, I have a PhD mentor that I call when I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. And he said the same thing. He's never seen a brain that was so underpowered. We went through protocols with him. They both reported little activation, inability to engage, difficulty with sleep, disorganization, and no affect or emotion. So 50 sessions later, he reported improvement across the board. He had more beta activation, which we see right here. These are beta ranges. And we want beta to be actively and evenly dispersed through the brain. So even though this is higher than I would want to see typically for an adult, for him, it corrected everything. He was having no more symptoms. Again, we got to hear his laugh as he was going through the trainings. He had more beta activation. He was able to sleep again. He was communicating his feelings, and both his wife and his kids indicated that he was engaged in life. Like I said, he's doing peak performance training right now, which is basically just, he wants his brain to stay fresh, alert. So he comes in a few times per month just to keep himself, on top of all of the tasks that he has as a business owner. All right, if I start to cry during this one, I will apologize right now. But this was one case that hit a little close to home for us. So this was a soldier. He had been to the Middle East 4 times. Each time he was sent back home after an explosion and death of most of his unit in each situation. He had 4 small kids, all under the age of 8. When they came to our office, because he was having nightmares in the middle of the night that were him reliving what he had been through. He was waking the entire family up, pulling them out of bed. Nobody was getting any sleep. His wife said she was considering leaving him because of how much damage it was doing to their children. And their kids were terrified every single time he did it. So what happens with some head injuries, and in his case, he had overactivation in delta and theta as well as gamma, which is pretty common. We see this with somebody who has PTSD. Their brain stays in a semi-dream state. They live in their trauma repeatedly, all day, every day. And every time he got triggered, his left hemisphere and his right hemisphere were not talking to each other, which is why he would jump right into the scenario of, I'm going through an explosion and I have to save all of my comrades. When we started this with this family, we actually had him go and live on base. Because when we're doing a PTSD protocol with a soldier who's been through situations like this, it's the same with firefighters and police officers who've been in shooting situations. While we're rewiring the left and the right hemisphere, the dreams can actually pick up and they can get more severe. We've had people in the middle of a neurofeedback appointment start crying, and they had no idea why they were crying, but within 3 days they had a dream or a memory of whatever it was that just wired back together. So whenever we're working with somebody with PTSD and a head injury, we also require not only the high-fat diet, they have to be working with a counselor because they have to process what it is that they went through. While we're going through this process, we're also rewiring the part of the brain that allows them to talk about their trauma. Because when you go through a situation that causes PTSD, the part of your brain that allows you to really process it and talk about it goes offline. Every soldier that we've worked with who started in our office has said, I can't even talk about it. As soon as I talk about it, I'm right back into it. Okay. So with this soldier, he actually was with us for almost 2 years. But that was because when he came to us, the VA had him on medication. And when we are working to get somebody off of medication, it's a very slow process. I can't pull anybody off meds. I need their doctor to be working with us and to be willing to collaborate. We have to do it really slow because I can only train to where medication is blocking me, okay? His doctor was willing to work with us, but we were on multiple medications, so it was a long, slow process. When he was on base for the first month, he did experience very traumatic flashbacks. And we actually received a phone call from the base that they were concerned because he was actually pulling other soldiers out of bed. But at the end of this, you can see his map has gone mostly white. When we got to the end of this, his wife was bawling in my office because she had her husband back. He was using the GI Bill and going back to college. And his kids were thrilled because he was building a treehouse with them, which was something he hadn't been able to do with them in over a year. Now, there are times when I cannot do neurofeedback. Sometimes people come in and they have a brain injury that's caused by something that is still an active injury. So in this case, I've got a 5-year-old child who had been mild-mannered, very happy, developing normally. All of a sudden, behavior got really erratic and weird. There was a lot of emotionality and aggression, and this child was not learning any longer. I did the brain map. I also did genetic testing and some stuff with vitamins to see what was going on in the background. It is very abnormal for a child to have this level of theta activity during the day. So I had to do a lot of research because there was no indication of a traumatic event. There was no indication of an actual head hit that could have caused anything. And this level of theta kept leading me back to head injury, head injury, head injury, but it wasn't making any sense until I found out that it was possible it was mold. So mold is something that I work with, but this kid's case was a little outside of my scope. So I brought in another provider and we did some mold testing. We found 6 molds at toxic levels in this child's system, 3 of which had neurotoxic properties. So this child, because mold was active in the brain, I could not do anything with in the moment. We are at 6 months right now, and they've been going through a mold detox with the doctor that I've been working with. The house they moved out of and is being remediated. We're getting ready to do another map to see how the brain has changed during the detox process. But mom has already reported that behavior has gone pretty much back to normal. We do expect that there is still damage in the brain from the mold that is going to have to be fixed. But, you know, I won't ever put somebody in my chair to do a neurofeedback session if I think that I could cause more damage to them. And doing neurofeedback while we've got active mold in the brain is not something I'm going to do. Okay, so for more information about neurofeedback itself, you can email me. I can send you thousands of research articles, depending on what the topic is that you want to learn about. And there's also a bunch of organizations for us. So ISNR is the International Society for Neurofeedback and Research. BCIA is the Biofeedback Certification International Alliance. They provide most of the trainings that we do, and they certify all of us. My mentor is actually Dr. John Demos, and he wrote Getting Started with Neurofeedback, and he continues to be my go-to for complicated cases. There's also clinical neurofeedback training and practice by Robert Coben and James Evans, which provides comprehensive information on neurofeedback. We're talking, the book is like this thick. There is so much for us to know with neurofeedback. And then you can also take courses on like Udemy or Coursera, and BCIA offers a lot of different courses to the community. Okay, so it's a lot of information. I really tried to condense it down as much as I could to get the most important stuff to you. Are there questions about what I did present? Yes.
Okay, so seizures, what if they're on Keppra? Like, how do you approach that?
So we would ask the medication provider to please write a plan with you for every 5 appointments to reduce the medication. And we would work with the medication provider. It's a you, me, and them conversation, making sure that every 5 appointments you're following the plan that they write for you to reduce the medication. The kiddo that we have right now at 16 days seizure free, she's already off of her seizure meds.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
2 questions.
Mhm.
I had the seizure question also. My daughter is born right-handed,
Mm-hmm.
but because she had right hemiplegia, she's now left-handed.
Okay.
So would you consider her right-brained or left?
She's still right-brained, though that may be an interesting brain to look at and see how her brain has rewired itself. And that is a case where I'd bring in Dr. Demos and ask him, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Do I need to change anything here?
Because she has regained a lot of function on her right, so I wonder
Mm.
if she would switch back to right if things, My other question is, how do you work with people that are long distance?
So what we do for people that are long distance, we actually have a few different options. All right, you can either fly to us and I'll do the brain map in my office, or I'll sell you a system and I will teach you how to do a brain map in your home. You send me the file, I write the protocols and send them back to you, and I teach you how to put the leads on. The system that we use is completely user-friendly. My kids are my neurofeedback technicians. My 15-year-old and my 19-year-old are in the office running neurofeedback because the system self-corrects through the entire appointment. It isn't something that you need to go in and do all of the training that I did for. Yeah.
Where are you located?
We are here in Texas. We have an office in Round Rock and an office in Dripping Springs. Mm-hmm.
I have a question too.
Yeah.
This is my brain injured child, but I have twin boys, and it was interesting because when you were talking about the go into your room and find your shoes,
Yeah.
I mean, he's absolutely did not come back with anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the other twin has a heightened sense of smell and just and
Mm-hmm.
different visual fields that you were talking about, different parts of the brain. So, but there's no injury there, per
So-
se. So is it interesting, because I was just wondering if that's if
Yeah.
the brain has to be injured to have those things out
No,
of whack, or-
no. So everybody has things. I have sensory stuff. I have worked in places where I've been assaulted by clients. I don't feel getting punched in the face, but I feel if you touch my feet, and I don't like that at all. We all have different sensory experiences, and we're all wired different. So I have kids in my office that are there just for anxiety. We work on anxiety, autism, depression, bipolar. I've worked with schizophrenia, Parkinson's. We can work across the spectrum. It's just brain-based. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there any benefits for a child with cerebral palsy?
So I'd have to do more research on that. I have not had a lot of experience with anybody with cerebral palsy. I would call Dr. Demos, and then I would pull research studies to see what is the best protocol, how efficacious is it. I would not put you in my chair and promise you that I'm going to fix something that it's not possible for me to fix. Yeah.
What does trauma and grief do with respect to biofeedback? Is that something that's helpful?
Yeah, so we do neurofeedback pretty frequently for PTSD. Like I said, with the soldier, with police officers, firefighters. I recently worked on a woman whose husband committed suicide in front of her, and that definitely caused her pretty severe PTSD. The brain just rewires itself when we experience a trauma. I have parents that I work with that have been through trauma, sitting by having to watch all of the stuff that their child has gone through. I did neurofeedback on myself for the trauma of the stuff that happened with my son. Yep. Yeah.
What about in regards to a child who's been through an air drowning, because I suppose it's still a type of brain injury that you would consider?
So I would consider it. I would do a brain map and see what are we working with. And again, whenever there's a case that I have never done before, I reach out to Dr. Demos. He is the one that actually wrote my program, and he's been doing neurofeedback for 50 years. So whenever I have a case, if there's any question in my mind, he is my go-to.
So you haven't specifically seen anyone?
I haven't specifically seen anyone for that. Yep.
What exactly happens when, like, the TV goes dark or whatever, and they have to correct themselves? Like, what is the point of that? Like, is it just the rewiring process?
Yep. So when that TV dims, our brains love the feedback of the TV. We get a dopamine hit the whole time we're watching it. So when it dims, their brain goes, wait a minute, what was I doing to keep the TV show on? I liked the TV show. So it corrects the pattern that isn't working correctly because it wants that dopamine hit again. And every time they turn that back on, the brain gets that hit and continues wanting it. So it really just helps trigger that regrowth and then the correction of the patterns.
Have you ever seen anyone not be able to turn the TV back on?
No.
No.
No. And we've worked on infants as young as 18 months. Even an 18-month-old can do it.
Because it's not like is it a conscious decision that
Nope.
they're making, or it's just the brain is doing
The
it?
brain's doing everything for you.
It's amazing.
Yep.
Do your kids ever have meltdowns? Because I could see my daughter flipping out.
So I've had kids that have puked on us. I've had kids that have had anxiety attacks in my office. I've been peed on. You name it, we've experienced it. It happens, and when we're working with people with PTSD and they start having a panic attack in the middle of an appointment, we've seen that too. My technicians are my kids. They've been trained on how to calm everybody down, and if anybody is super escalated, they'll immediately come and get me.
So, when that does happen and like your client can't calm down, you just kind of continue through the session?
We do. I walk in and then I will start using any mechanisms. I could be grounding, I could be talking about deep breathing, let's focus on something else. It's really dependent on the person, and I have a relationship with all of those clients. So I have a pretty good understanding of what's going to be the best way for me to de-escalate. Yep.
And then how many sessions? Like, I know everyone's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
20 to 40, is that?
So everybody is different. It depends on what's going on. How severe is the damage, all right? I can work on somebody for anxiety and it's 15 appointments. I've worked on soldiers where it was PTSD and we were able to resolve it within 20 appointments. And then I've worked on other soldiers where it was 2 years worth of appointments. It is such an individual thing and process. There is a part of it that has to do with how healthy is the brain, and when we're combating a head injury, those do tend to take longer. Okay. For some people, it is more cost effective to buy the system for your house and to be able to do it as much as you want. Yeah.
That led me to a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm extremely interested. My daughter had a severe traumatic brain injury, and every single symptom that you mentioned she has. She also has pandas, I think,
Okay.
just because of
Yep.
everything is. I also have a daughter with misophonia, super sensitive to sounds in her environment and super triggering to sounds in her environment. So even if it's more than one child in my household, myself for the PTSD,
Yep.
if we purchase a system, would then each of us be able to, you could write a program and we could use it kind of for our family?
Yeah. Yep.
And are you monitoring that? Like if I live in New Hampshire, I do. So, are you in Texas looking to see what I'm doing? Is there a way?
So there's a way that we file share, so that I can look at each appointment afterwards. You can send me a graph, and it shows me how the appointment went, and I can also read each of the sessions. I meet with you every 10 appointments, so that we know what change has occurred, what change hasn't occurred, and do we need to change anything? Okay. Unless something like a seizure starts, and then we're meeting immediately. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you guys for coming. I am so glad that you came and learned about neurofeedback. And again, if any questions do come up, please stop by my table. I'll give you my card. I'll answer questions here, but I'll also give you my email is on the card, and you can reach out. Okay.
Really appreciate it.